Okay, so this video is going to be our second one in economics, and it's the lecture 1.1 Fundamentals Part 2. I know the first one ran a little bit longer than I wanted it to, so hopefully we'll make this one relatively quick. The first idea in this one is really just two words that you might see a lot, so it's a little bit more just a vocabulary building. Sometimes you'll see people say, this is a normative judgment, and what they're saying is they're referring to the idea of making a judgment or making a statement based on economic fairness, or equity, or justice, right? Giving people what they're due. And that's the idea of what should be, is another way to think about that. So sometimes, students will ask me, hey, Mr. Glassinger, what do you think we should do for the minimum wage? And I'm like, well, do you want normative information? Like, do you want me to tell you what I think economically in terms of equity should be? Or do you want a positive economic statement? And positive not meaning good, but more meaning an economic fact, right? And that is to say what is. So do you want me to say, here's what the research studies tell us about the minimum wage? So that's a useful kind of frame to return to when we think about economic models and what are we talking about here. The second thing in today's lecture, and really this is it, is the idea of the business cycle. And this is a macroeconomic concept, right? This is macro because we're talking about the whole economy. So it's the first model we're going to learn about, and it's a model of the short run, and that's what SR here means, short run alternations between, and we would say between an expansion, which would be increasing output, more stuff, and a recession, which you've probably heard of a recession, right? Because right now, actually, as I record this video, we're in a recession. A really nasty one, and that's decreasing output. And that's what this model really represents, is just how do we model the more output, less output business cycle, right? Going up and down and up and down. And we would say economic growth is a related concept where we have an increase in capacity for output. Now, I'm gonna try to draw this analogy for you with a car. Think about a car that has a gas tank. And there's a certain amount of gas in the gas tank, right, today, and you might be able to go, you might not have very much in the gas tank today, and that would be like a recession, right? And maybe you have lots of gas in your gas tank, and that would be like, well, you have lots of ability for you're actually producing lots and lots right now, but the capacity of the gas tank roughly stays the same, right? And you'd have to do some kind of major modifications to the car in order to change the capacity of the gas tank. So when we talk about an economy, if you're thinking about it like this, changing the capacity of the gas tank is what economic growth means. It means that we can actually produce more stuff per person. So this standard of living is output per person. And so we'd say that if you have more output per person, then you have an increase in standard of living. That's one measure, right? Just one. It's not all of the be all end all. It's just one. So there are lots of other things that would obviously go into it. But in general, having more output per person in an economy actually means people's lives are better off, and that's normative, right? Obviously, but what we can say there is that it tracks with all kinds of good stuff. Fewer babies dying, lower infant mortality. We have longer life expectancy. We have generally higher rated happiness scales with countries that have higher GDP per capita, which is per capita means per person or per head. And GDP is the measure for output. So we would say the more output per person we have, generally speaking, the better off people are. How do we get that, right? That's like the Goldilocks thing. That's what we really, really want. And there are three things that create that. Increase in the quality or the quantity of your physical capital. Right? So you have more machines, more tools, more factories, that sort of thing. Or if you improve their quality. Right, so that's one thing. Improving the quality or the quantity of your labor force, right? So if you make your workers more productive, if you make your workers more effective at making new products and services, then that can create economic growth because literally the capacity has grown. But generally speaking, those things are things that you kind of work around the edges. The big one is actually increased productivity, and I kind of alluded to it. I cheated a little bit in saying you make them more productive by training them more. If you can increase how much they produce, you have the same resource, the same teacher, right, Mr. G here, and if he can teach 1,000 students, then now you've made him 10 times as productive as he would be in another setting. And so increasing the productivity is what really can create economic growth. And sometimes we call that technology. It doesn't necessarily mean like this laptop that we're using right now. What it actually means is more, how do you combine your resources together? And do you do it in a more effective way? And so if there are little tips and tricks that you could do to make things more effective, to be more productive, that's how you create real economic growth. Now we have our very first graph in this class, and I'm going to warn you, graphs are not going to be that bad. We don't actually use units on any of the graphs that we're going to use. So it's not that mathy in this introductory level, right? Economics at the collegiate level is very mathy, pretty math heavy. So get to understand that now. But in introductory econ, we don't need a lot of graph. We're not going to graph functions, for example, in introductory economics. But we are going to have kind of pictures that illustrate what's going on. So this is a lot going on in that picture. So I'm going to actually draw it over here, and hopefully this helps you a little bit with understanding the business cycle. So almost all the time in our graphs, we're just going to do a big L like that. And down here is time, lowercase t. And up here, I'm going to use Y, and Y stands for output. Now on the graph over there in that one, it's actually GDP, and then a little lowercase r, and that stands for real GDP, and we'll learn what all that stuff means in the coming videos. The first thing that we're going to do is put kind of a wavy line. Now notice that I'm going down, back up again, down, back up again, kind of like that, right? And that's our wavy line. That's going to be our actual output, our actual amount of output. And then we're going to say there's a trend here, and the trend is, as you notice, increasing. And it's not perfectly straight. This is a model, right? It doesn't have to be pretty. So what we'd say, let me kind of focus that just a little bit, is that if the trend is increasing, then we have growth, right? Because the trend here can also refer to the capacity. The capacity. Now, some of you might point out, Mr. Glasser, the actual is going above the capacity here. Yeah, you can. In theory, you can for a short time, right? You can push really hard and you could get more out of your economy, but it wouldn't be something that's sustainable in the long run. Now, we're going to label a couple of points on this. So I'm going to switch colors and switch over to a red color here. Anytime that you go from a peak to a trough, right? And there's a math term here, but from the top to the bottom of the line here, we would call that a recession. And technically, a recession is 2 consecutive 3-month-long periods in which output is going down. Okay, so that's 6 straight months at least. You could have 9 months or 10, 12, whatever. But it's at least 2 3-month periods in a row where output is falling in real dollar terms. So decreasing output. And we would usually say that recessions they also have unemployment, and I'm going to use an abbreviation UE, is going to go up. And unemployment's really high right now in the United States when I'm recording this video. Unemployment usually goes up, and we would say that price levels usually go down. And again, we're going to learn more about what those words mean later. Generally speaking, we'd say that price levels are usually lower during recessions, and unemployment is higher. At the same time, when you have going from a trough up here to a peak, right, that is an expansion. And we'd say that that's characterized by increasing output. Now you could have, bear with me here, you could have 6 months of a recession, and then 3 months of increasing, and then 6 months of a recession again. And that's what we actually call a double dip recession. It's really pretty nasty, but it does happen sometimes, right? And so the expansion, there isn't a time minimum on it. The moment that you start going back up again, now you're in an expansion again, okay? And we would also say that the opposite, we could say over here, we would say also during expansions, unemployment typically goes down because people get jobs. And we would say that price levels usually go up. Okay, now I'm going to show you a couple graphs here, and this is a graph of real GDP. So this is actually the business cycle that we're looking at in this picture, and see if you can kind of spot here, and the gray bars actually kind of give it away. They tell you where the recessions are. So here's the last 10 years. Let me make that just a little wider so you can see. So notice here that in 2004, 2005, when you were little kids and stuff, we were getting really good with GDP, and then it was at $15.6 trillion with a T, 7, and then boom, down, right? And that decrease in GDP right there, the value of all the stuff we're producing, was a recession. And now you can see here, we were at a peak of $19.2 trillion worth of stuff. That's an enormous amount of stuff. And then boom, down, right? So that's a really steep recession. We are now producing in Q2 of 2020, the last time we have data, at least for when I'm recording this, $17.2 trillion worth of stuff. So you can see that recession bar is actually a little bit hard to see there. Maybe if we zoom all the way into the last 1 year, you can see the recession here started in Q2 of 2020, because in Q1 of 2020, GDP went down, but that was only the first quarter. So the second quarter is actually where the recession began. And so you can really see that in the last 5 years, it's pretty dramatic, the change there. Going all the way back to the 1940s, you can see tiny little recessions. Those looked much bigger to the people when they were living through them, though. So you can see, if we zoom into the 1980s, decreasing GDP, decreasing GDP. So hopefully this helps you make sense of one of the models of economics, the business cycle, and I'll see you next time.